watching, the undermanned Russian army lose Kharkov and Kherson was an unfortunate point in the war where I think it gave false hope to the Ukrainian people and to Western backers that this was going to be able to turn into something beneficial. As that offensive occurred in Kharkov, and then Kherson was a Russian withdrawal. That just gave this false hope that ended up leading all the way through Bakhmut, which was a horrible disaster for the Ukrainian army, into this counteroffensive through the summer, which ended up also being a horrible disaster for the Ukrainian army. And now what you're looking at is a Ukraine that is very quickly losing Western support. And I think that now we're almost seeing a complete drop of Ukraine. It's not in the media as much anymore. It's not being talked about. Israel, the whole Israel thing happened perfectly timed for Israel and perfectly timed for the West to get out of, their bad optics and their bad publicity on Ukraine.
Welcome to the Geopop Perspective. Today we have with us Scott from Kalibrated. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on. So it's a pleasure to come on your show. I just wanted to say that one of the reasons I actually got into podcasting and YouTube was because of your channel. So I appreciate it, man.
Actually, I'm happy to hear that, and I really do appreciate it. I noticed you pretty early on Twitter, actually, and you since have spread to Telegram and YouTube now as well, right? You do, yeah, okay. You do some vlogging on there. I haven't actually got to see very much of your YouTube. It's shown up a couple times, but I try not to watch a lot of Ukraine stuff on YouTube. Spend so much time looking at all the other platforms and everything. So why don't? Okay, we'll start like this. There's a lot of people out there who are going to throw a lot of labels at you, Scott. They're going to call you different things. So why don't you tell the audience? Why don't you give them your label? Tell them, what you do, what your views on this stuff are. Just let it rip.
Yeah, for sure. So I get mislabeled probably more than anybody else on Twitter. I don't claim any ideology. I don't back any side particularly. I do represent, in my personal opinion, the United States of America. That's where I live. I vote here. I pay taxes here. And I feel like I should have a say, or I should speak up if I believe things are not appropriate. And I don't think that U.S. foreign policy is particularly appropriate at the current stage. I have a lot of problems with what we do around the globe. I have a lot of problems with what we do domestically. But none of that is, I would say, like culture politics or no religion, I don't have any ideologies outside of that, no communism or anything like that. A lot of people in what I would say is the pro-Russian information sphere, which now includes Senate Defender and a bunch of other pro-Ukrainian accounts, because anytime they say anything that is based in reality, they kind of get cannibalized by their own side. And very early on, I was put into the pro-Russian side of the information space, which is, I would say, fair, because I do cover the pro-Russian perspective a little bit more in depth. And the reason I went that route when I started, creating content both on YouTube, Twitter, and Telegram, I very, very much so thought that what the U.S. had done in Ukraine, even before 2014, since 2011, really, has been rather pragmatic or not non-pragmatic in Ukraine's interests, and more of a poorly trained and poorly treated proxy. I think that Ukraine is a beautiful country. I think that the Ukrainian people, for the most part, are, Slavic, hardworking people. I have no problem with Ukrainians. I have problems with specific ideologies that sometimes pop up in Ukraine, but I don't think that the majority of the population of Ukraine believes in that ideology. I think it is a very loud minority, and it puts a bad image on Ukraine. So covering the more pro-Russian side of the information space, that came to me because I wanted to show an English-speaking population, especially at the beginning of the war, the other side, what was going on, because there was so much propaganda coming out. The big pro-Ukrainian accounts at the beginning of the war were very, very dominant. This was before Twitter became X. So the I would say censorship of pro-Russian accounts was much, much tougher. I actually lost my first Twitter account when I was conversing about Bucha. I didn't even make a crazy claim about Bucha. I just was going over some evidences that were coming out from both sides, and I got banned for that, mass reported and banned. So that was my first Twitter account. There's not really a lot on there. It was only around for like 2 weeks because Bucha happened very early on. And then a little later on, I decided to come back. And after I spent some time on Telegram and I got a better eye for everything, I came back and made my current account. And from there, I would say that I am on the pro-Russian side. Definitely. That's definitely what I get labeled. I have no interest in really Russia winning. I think it only hampers my situation over here in the United States. If the US loses, technically I lose, but I have a problem with how the US is conducting itself. And I believe that in this instance, Russia is, how am I going to say this? I believe that Russia is, I wouldn't say justified in all of their actions, but in terms of the invasion of Crimea, I believe that they were justified. And then in the protection of the Donbass when they entered, I believe that they were justified. Now, do I believe that Russia is the good guy in all of this? No, I don't. I think that every country has its own bias, its own wants and needs, and they're going to exploit things in every which way they can. I put myself in the realist bracket, but that tends to get confused with the pro-Russian bracket. So I think that that's where I stand.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, just the term justification. I mean, when you start throwing that around, I mean, people have all these connotations, but it's actually, for a long time was a military and political term that different parties would use to say like, justification for a war. So like, I mean, if you just straight up, even back in like say Roman times, like if you just kicked in the door of your neighbor for like no reason whatsoever, every other nation around you would be like, hey, what the hell is going on? Yeah. So seeking, countries would seek justification, and by extension, what the Romans, and I guess in Latin called casus belli, which just basically means that justification for war. So it's basically like your excuse for going into battle, and which in that particular context, really. It doesn't mean this should justify to the world while we're doing this. It just means like to the most concerned parties and to our own population, this is our justification for these actions. And probably, I mean, you can see by the international reaction what happened to Crimea. Apparently, a lot of people thought that, all right, well, even if we don't think it's justified, it's not worth doing anything over. So that gives it some legitimacy. So, I mean, yeah, I definitely completely agree with you on, America first, I guess you could say, not to put some kind of political slogan on it, but like that's the way I feel as well. Is when it comes to these international issues, I believe that whatever's best for America, and I'm inclined to certainly agree with you that I don't think the war in Ukraine is what's best for America, because I mean, if Ukraine lost tomorrow, America's not going to be affected. It's more or less what's best for Europe, and not even what's best for Europe, what's best for Eastern Europe. So, our core allies, France, helped us win the revolution. I care about what happens to France. I really do. Germany, has been, a very strong friend of ours since the end of World War II. Yeah, I want to stay friends with Germany. The British, of course, longtime friends. Japan, it's very critical that we stay friends with Japan. Those things are important. When you start straying further from the core mass of that group, that's where I start to think, okay, maybe this is, but that's all the opinion I'm going to give in this podcast episode, I promise. So, I'm sure there's like a lot of things we disagree on. I, for one, don't, I try to cover a bit more of both sides of it, but just my kind of opinion of your channel, and let me know if you agree with this. Along the description that you say, like you kind of are a counterweight to a lot of these pro-Ukraine propaganda accounts. Would you consider yourself the anti-troll?
I don't know if I'd consider myself an anti-troll. I mean, kind of for sure, but
Mm-hmm.
I want to inform is what I want to do, and I have my own personality. I don't do this for anybody else. I have a pretty large Twitter following, but I would be doing this if I had 500 followers, right? I don't care about any of that. I don't do this for money. I don't care. What I really wanted to do was expose the lies. We were seeing lie after lie after lie coming out. Ghost of Kiev, Snake Island, all of these things. They were just continuous propaganda pieces that were fooling the American public into gulping up all of this, fake nonsense about Russia being this horrible, horrible monster and Ukraine being this bastion of freedom. And I'm young, so I mean I think you're pretty young too. I'm 25, and when I was 15, 14 is when I started looking at Ukraine. I have always been interested in geopolitics, and I was watching this, and I've watched Ukraine. I've observed Ukraine for a very long time, and it is not a bastion of democracy. It is not protecting the West from the Russian horde. That's not what it is. In fact, most of the Ukrainians east of the Dnieper River are basically Russian. So, I wanted to really just counteract that. And if that makes me an anti-troll, I guess that works. But any of the joking and the trolling you're seeing is just me entertaining myself with the platform that I have, right? I don't do that for anybody else. I like making fun of people sometimes, and I do that. So.
Well, you certainly have a knack for it. Highly recommend following Scott on Twitter. I believe you're actually under the handle Aiden on Twitter. Is that?
So when I was first starting, I wanted to keep a little bit of anonymity, but I mean, my middle name is Aiden, so that's how I mean, I didn't get doxxed necessarily. I doxed myself. I started going on podcasts and stuff, but nobody really knew who I was. And then Pekka, I don't know if you know him. He came out. No. He's the one who doxes everybody. He does Vatnik soup. He's so annoying. Anyway, he just all he does is dox pro-Russian accounts, right? Anybody who he doesn't agree with, he doxes them, he exposes them, gets them fired, all of this different stuff. I'm sort of in a position where I'm very immune to that. So when they started doxing me, I just owned it, and I just came out and I was like, yeah, this is me. What are you going to do about it? I got death threats. My mom got death threats, all that stuff, which that doesn't really bother me any. I know who I'm talking to online. Terminally online people really are good at making threats, but that's about it. They don't get out of their house. So yeah. I'm not.
You're not dealing with real actual threats, and that's one thing. Well, I mean, it is kind of scary. I'm sure to get that kind of stuff, which I haven't really experienced it that much. I mean, from the very beginning, I've said I could sympathize with the Ukrainian people, like they're under attack, they want to defend their country.
I think everybody can, right?
Yeah, it's not difficult at all, and in some people, I mean, you see people that definitely can't. Like, it's crazy. Like, if you could dive, I don't recommend taking dives into the comments, especially around this timestamp right here. But yeah, I mean, like, there's your crazies out there, but the people that say the craziest stuff, even though it is kind of scary and hurtful, it's like, it's basically, I can't remember where I heard this. Maybe it's on Joe Rogan or something. It's like the internet is basically like a depository for thoughts, right? And like, like when you're in traffic and you're like, oh, like, fuck that guy, like, the guy in front of you that's like, cut you off or whatever. Like, so you say that inside your head, but you never seen or met that person. What if they got out of the car and it was like, your aunt or something? Like, obviously you're not going to feel that way, but like the internet is just basically a reflection of like the worst thoughts that people have, and people just, vent to you. I mean, anyone that does that is no real physical threat.
No.
But and I hate, on the flip side of that, I hate when they take that and like say, like, liberal politicians or whatever, or someone on the wrong side of things will, get the anger of the mob, and then they'll be like, look at this, I'm getting death threats, and it's like, please, we've all gotten those.
Yeah.
Those aren't those aren't real. But yeah, so I mean, it's definitely one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is because I mean, I don't think you're pro-Russian, but you certainly take a bit of that side of things in your commentary and your analysis, and I don't think necessarily that's a bad thing, because like you said, it's free and open society, and I mean, I think information is very important for people to make their decisions, and if what you say is true and the American people like are not going to benefit from this war, then information that could convince them to vote a different way is, it needs to be out there. Now, I mean, I say if because, we don't know the future.
Yeah.
But and it, it's a reasonable position to have, based on our laws and what you're allowed to do here. So, so this is the third episode of the Geopop Perspective podcast, and the first guest I had on was Sean Bell, who's a former RAF pilot and spent a lot of time on Sky News. Certainly more of a pro-Ukrainian, far more sympathetic to Ukraine. But he painted a very bleak outlook for Ukraine. Is not, the things he was talking about was not mainstream narrative at all. Really liked him. He's a very nice guy. And then earlier today, I had Alex from History Legends, who's
awesome.
Great guy. Pretty good podcast with him. Certifiably neutral in his reporting. He does a pretty good job criticizing anyone that really deserves it. And then now I have you, Scott, who's sitting a little bit, on the other side of the issue. So, this is exactly how I wanted to start it out. Now I have, different perspectives, dancing all around the same topic. So, to continue on with some of the same questions that I was asking them, so we can, the audience can get some comparison and how we, the difference between everyone. All right, so let's get your perspective on how things are going on in Ukraine overall right now. Just not necessarily the front line, but just as a country, like where you think Ukraine's at, like what are the problems?
Do you want a present, or do you want a kind of a run up?
Yeah, just how about it, man?
So I mean, at the start of the conflict, I didn't expect Ukraine to fight the way that they did. I thought that was the absolute worst thing that they could have done. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I believe personally that this conflict should have never happened. I believe that the civil war in the Donbass should never have happened. I don't believe the coup should never have happened. I put basically the coup in Ukraine that took place, Maidan, as the catalyst for all of this. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody does, but and that's why I put so much of the onus on the United States for causing all of this. I think that this was part of their plan. I think that the utilization of Ukraine against Russia has been something that the CIA has been working on since the 1950s. This is not something new. And, watching this being implemented over 10 years, 8, 9, 10 years, was very interesting. And I was the whole time just kind of screaming at my phone or my computer, why are you doing this? Why are you going hand in hand with this? Obviously, the regime there was a puppet of the United States, in my personal opinion. But the people were so, I hate to say, easily propagandized, but they went along with this so handily. It was incredible to see the amount of what I would consider Russophobia, especially in the western parts of Ukraine, that was fomented. And it was just very odd. And so coming into the actual invasion, I did not expect Ukraine to fight. They ended up fighting. I expected negotiations in Istanbul to go well. I see that the West, the way I see it, is the West came in and interfered with those negotiations and ended up ruining them, which led to further loss of life, which I consider to be horrible. One thing that I think is very interesting is the Russian approach to this conflict. It has seemed very careful and calculated when it comes to civilian casualties. Even their infrastructure campaign was not something that you would have seen from the United States. The United States there would have been no sewage, no water, no internet in all of Ukraine if the United States had gone in theoretically, right? They would have tomahawked everything. The Russians didn't do that. They went in soft and they paid for it. They continued to fight soft and they continue to pay for it. And I think it's the right approach, honestly. I think the Russians are playing this very smart. I think they're winning a lot of international favor, especially considering what we're seeing in Gaza right now. And as the conflict evolved, it just kept going down this path of like escalation and desperation from the United States and Ukraine and what they were doing. And really watching, the undermanned Russian army lose Kharkov and Kherson was, I don't know. It was an unfortunate point in the war where I think it gave false hope to the Ukrainian people and to Western backers that this was going to be able to turn into something beneficial after the sanction package had failed around June. I think June 2022, everybody was kind of under the impression that the sanctions that the West had put on Russia had failed. And as that offensive occurred in Kharkov, and then Kherson was a Russian withdrawal. That just gave this false hope that ended up leading all the way through Bakhmut, which was a horrible disaster for the Ukrainian army, into this counteroffensive through the summer, which ended up also being a horrible disaster for the Ukrainian army. And now what you're looking at is a Ukraine that is very quickly losing Western support, just politically, even not even just domestic, U.S., not the U.S. population even, but in the actual political realm is losing support very quickly. It's becoming very expensive. They can't even get a financial aid package passed, which I still believe will get passed eventually. I do think Ukraine will get its aid that it needs, its money that it needs. But as of right now, it's looking very, very tentative. And I just think even the fact that they're questioning it is a very, very, very bad sign for Ukraine. Militarily, Ukraine, they still have decent manpower. I feel like now we're starting to run up against the shortages. We saw the 47th Mechanized Brigade get moved from Zaporozhye to Avdiivka without proper refit and reconstitution timing. They were loaded up with mobilized infantry and sent in. We saw a bunch of Bradleys and Leos get lost around Avdiivka. So I think Ukraine is up against it right now. I think they know they're up against it. I believe that we are going to see a lot of lashing out here very soon from Ukraine as things begin to degrade very quickly. And I think the way that this ends is with regime change in Kiev. I don't see any way that the Russians get around that. I don't see any way that the U.S. gets out of it without a regime change. Whether that is beneficial for the U.S. or beneficial for Russia, I don't know. Zelensky doesn't seem like the person to negotiate right now. So I believe that the U.S. may try to usurp him and get somebody in there who will be willing to negotiate. How much power they actually have in the Ukrainian political sphere, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, they are paying for everything, so they have to have some sort of say in what's happening. But I do think Ukraine has more anonymity than a lot of people would care to believe. And I believe that they act against the wishes of the U.S. in a lot of different ways, especially through the objects that they choose to strike. Daria Dugina and the Moscow or the St. Petersburg Cafe are prime examples of this, where there were basically completely civilian illegal targets that were targeted because of their propaganda value for Ukraine. I don't think that came from the West at all. I think that the West was
Yeah,
very
it's very that's very uncharacteristic
yeah.
of a CIA
It
operation.
doesn't benefit them, right? Like what? How does that benefit the U.S. to have their proxy doing that? It doesn't. And how does that benefit
Yeah.
Ukraine? Even it doesn't, right? That's just a domestic win for Ukraine.
Some of the
So I think
more, yeah, I mean, with the CIA too, like some of the, I mean, it's tough to know like what they have and
yeah,
haven't done, but some of the more, like even ones where there's, I guess you could say conspiracy or pretty strong assumptions that they were involved, were not very public, or just, you know, like the cause of death was always questionable. It's like, you know, America isn't the kind of country that's like, you know, that makes a mess and is like, look, we did that, like,
yeah,
you know, stop it or we'll do it again. You know, that is something more typical actually of Russia or China.
yeah.
You know,
Being very
case in point,
visible. Yeah,
the guy, well, the ex KGB guy in Great Britain with the nerve agent. I mean, like the guy was very well known. I'm pretty sure he'd been on TV before, and you're
they
gonna
could.
go after him with
And if you
nerve
think
agent.
about it, if they wanted to do it secretly, they could have hired somebody who wasn't related to the KGB to Russia at all to
Mm-hmm.
execute this individual in whatever manner they chose fit. But they chose a
Oh, it was Russians got off a plane from Russia and then got back on a plane back to Russia. Yeah.
and
And,
they
you know, on
used a
top of that, it's a
chemical.
nerve agent that's like so unique. And I mean, like, yeah,
They did it on
arguably it
purpose.
wasn't
Yeah,
like a public like bombing or something,
yeah,
but like, I mean, just there's overwhelming evidence. Like that was the point. Is like they left
yes,
behind a trail just to send a message to
absolutely.
any traders out there. But yeah, I mean, you know, small tangent there. Interesting what you say actually about Russia going in soft. This is something that like people don't really talk about a lot, but I mean, Russia has, you know, fairly large army, and unanimously, like even Western and pro-Ukrainian analysts agree that like they entered the country, it was somewhere slightly north of 200,000 men,
Yep.
spread out, you know, on all sides, on all borders. I mean, they couldn't possibly hope to cap the whole thing off
Yep.
with a force like that. So,
The goal was never to conquer all of Ukraine like all of the propaganda was saying. And this was one of the first arguments that I really got into people with. I was like, the Russians came in with 180,000 soldiers. I mean, 200,000, we can just round it up, whatever. I don't think it makes much of a difference. That going up against a Ukrainian army who is in active mobilization, who is that is larger than the Russian military going in. I mean, that is a big deal. And I think that the primary thing you have to look at is Ukraine still has power generation. Russia has unlimited missiles basically at this point. I mean, obviously they have a limit if they're firing thousands, you know, a month.
right.
But
Can't get reckless with them, but yeah,
they've been firing them like nothing for years, and now their domestic production has come up so much that Iskanders are now used every single night. You know, Garand 2s are used every single night. But at the beginning of the conflict, when Russia had the surprise, aspect, what did they target? They targeted barracks. They targeted, and they were even careful with barracks as well. Mass casualty events. They didn't want to get, the Ukrainian people all upset about losing a bunch of their army, and that army could be used by Russia in the future, technically, right? So they didn't go after power generation, and I think that is the biggest hint as to how the Russians wanted this to go. I think that they wanted to put a lot of political pressure by placing those troops on the border. They also went in during March, late February, March, which is the beginning of the muddy season. That is not an operationally sound time to enter Ukraine. That's the time they chose. They ended up getting bogged down by it, obviously, because that's what's happening. But I don't think the Russians were ever planning to go into Kiev. They didn't have the manpower to go into Kiev. I think they were just trying to put enough political pressure on the regime in Kiev to negotiate, which was March Istanbul. And then as soon as you saw that fail, what did the Russians do? They backed out of Kiev, right? There was no point in them being there. So I think that is a major thing.
Yeah, something I mentioned to Sean, Air Force, Royal Air Force pilot that was on here first was, I mean, just like the Russian grouping that was coming down from Belarus on the western side of the Dnieper, 20,000, 25,000 paratroopers, but I mean, no force that size in the world. no matter how well trained, is going to capture a city that big.
No.
I mean, it just didn't make any sense. And I mean, he mentioned that. I mean, it was his belief, and like, just quick side note, like, I don't have any issue with people that have differing opinions based on, say the information that they have.
Sure.
Or the way they've analyzed that information. People look at things differently, and people get different pieces of information. I like to judge people on character, whether they're a good guy or not.
For sure.
The people that I dislike in this comment or in this conflict are the trolls. Basically, like, if you live in Ukraine, like, you should be diehard supporting Ukraine. Like, just like I would be if the Russians were here.
Unless you're like orthodoxy or something, and then you might support Russia, right?
But if you're from frickin' like Ireland and you're posting like Slava Ukraine every day on your Twitter, like, or if you're from Italy and you're like, Slava Russia, or like, oh, dude, like, get out of here. But
so weird.
I mean, so like in the comments, Sean got a lot of flack, but I mean, he's a very experienced military man. I mean, he was a vice air marshal, so I mean, he knows what he's talking about, and his opinions might be different based on the information he's getting, but his basic line of thinking was that, and the way he said it makes me believe that he thinks that this is what military brass in the West think, which kind of puts a little bit of legitimacy behind what he's saying, at least for why he's saying it. But he thinks that the Russians really thought that Ukraine was going to collapse.
I mean,
they really thought that they weren't going to fight back, so they just sent in a quick force just to march in and, put down the government and, like, take control. And when they figured out that that wasn't going to happen, then that force was pointless, and they pulled them out.
Yeah, and I mean,
that's basically your opinion as well?
I think you can see that from, I mean, you can call it an intelligence failure, or you can call it an intelligence success on the Ukrainian side. But they had Spetsnaz walking down the streets of Kharkov, down the street, unprotected, no heavy armor, nothing. They went in there to secure the Capitol building and take it over. They did the same thing in Kherson. Kherson, they did it effectively, right? There was no battle there.
Yeah.
They walked into that city and it became a Russian city. So
there was a battle at the bridge crossing that, I mean, it didn't last long.
But no battle like around Kharkov.
Yeah.
Right. The Ukrainians retreated out of there. The military retreated, and the administrative bodies quickly surrendered and cooperated with the Russian occupation, if you want to call that came in, that's what it is technically. So yeah, you can call it that. But I think that everybody thought that the Ukrainians wouldn't fight. I don't think that the Ukrainians fighting was the right move for Ukraine. I don't think that General Mark Milley is famous for saying 3 days to Kiev, right? That's his quote from before the conflict started. I don't think military brass in the United States thought Ukraine was going to fight. I think that what their goal was to either resolve the issue in the Donbass and then use that to get Ukraine into NATO and the EU, further expanding the NATO alliance up against the Russian border, putting pressure on the Russians, and then economically strangulating them and pulling them away from China, because China is the real target for the United States. China is the adversary that is coming up into power, the economic powerhouse, not necessarily militarily, but just China is the US's competition, right? It's not Russia. So the goal was to pull Russia and its energy and commodities away from a Chinese influence, because that would make China a different beast. And I think it has now. China is going to be securing its energy resources for the foreseeable future through Russia. They're building pipelines and stuff like that. So I think that the goal was either the Ukrainians go in and end the civil war and then join NATO, or the Russians actually commit, which I don't think the West actually expected the Russians to commit. And when the Russians commit, we will sanction them to oblivion and cause regime change in Russia. In June, when that didn't happen, that everything that comes after that is plan B and what I would consider desperation. And I think that now we're almost seeing a complete drop of Ukraine It's not in the media as much anymore. It's, it's not being talked about. Israel, the whole Israel thing happened perfectly timed for Israel and perfectly timed for the West to get out of, their bad optics and their bad publicity on Ukraine. And for Israel, I mean, Israel was looking at increasingly chaotic and I would say there was a fire burning in Israel around the judicial system, right? They were having a lot of issues with that. And I think all of this came at a perfect time to sort of alleviate that. And I'm not saying that it was planned or it was a false flag or anything like that. I'm not trying to get into conspiracy theories, but I just think that the timing was very perfect for the U.S. to capitalize on it and say, "Oh, look we need to support Israel, 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 Israel." And then Israel was like, "Yeah, this is great. Let's go this direction because we are, facing a lot of domestic issues, and we can use this to kind of gain a lot of support and silence all of that for a while."
Well, I would disagree with you there slightly. I think that ultimately, in the light that you're presenting, if it gets the U.S. out of the Ukraine conflict, then it was great timing for the U.S. But I think it's certainly not the way that the administration sees it. The current administration, far more so than the people here, want the war to continue. So, like the Israeli-Gaza conflict kicking off is very, very bad for them. That's kind of the way that I see it. So it seems beneficial, really, to the Russians, and I think you see that.
They want it to continue, but at the rate it's going, do you think that do you think that the U.S. is actually going to be benefiting from Ukraine, because Ukraine is starting to become a money pit, and politically we're coming into an election year? And the Republicans, I think it's a bipartisan thing. Everybody wants the military-industrial complex to be booming, right? But I do believe that politically, the Republicans and the Democrats they'll use anything against each other all the time, right? And this Ukraine conflict is starting to sour for the United States. Not for the military-industrial complex. They can still cash out, right? They can still get funding from the United States government to produce weapons that may or may not ever make it to Ukraine, right? People are still going to be making money. I do think it's beneficial for the United States, and it's beneficial to keep Russia occupied and attriting Russia in Ukraine. Keep them on a war footing for as long as possible. Just do as much damage as they can, right? But at what point are we going to sacrifice re-election for Ukraine? Is that what the Biden administration is looking at? Do they keep? And I don't even think it's the military funding. I really think it's the financial funding that needs to be passed for Ukraine that's coming up against the wall.
I'd be hard pressed to name a politician in American history that ever sacrificed anything for re-election. It's just not. That's just not what they do. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I agree with you for sure. Just on the point of starting to be a money pit. Just my views, kind of without any kind of clear goal. That's just what it already is. If we're not in it for the Ukrainian people, which the thought that we might stop funding them means that wasn't always the goal. And if we are in it for what some of the military, not necessarily the government. The government basically has blatantly said this, but it's a good investment because it weakens Russia. That's the logical reason for being there. And then the reason that they present to the masses that good are I don't want to say the idiots, but the people that go to work every day and have a family and don't have time to know what's going on in the world, they tell those people we're doing this because it's a good thing and because we're trying to help Ukrainians. Which there's just holes in all these arguments, and I've always kind of defaulted to the more the more realist, let's just imagine we're playing 4D chess here, the great game, Geopolitics. And yes, it does make sense to, if you have a chance to take out an enemy, if you're in a boxing match, it doesn't even have to be chess, and there's going to be 7 or 8, 9 rounds. I don't know. Obviously, I don't watch a lot of boxing. that's a money pit in America.
Yeah,
signing up for boxing and MMA like on TV, very expensive. But I mean, if you got a chance to knock an opponent out in the first round, it's like, I mean, who sits back and is like, no, it'd be way cooler if I just let him stay up till like the 8th or 9th round. You know, like, I mean, you're gonna take your chance to like take your enemy down. So like, it makes sense in that aspect, but it's like also, I mean, just clearly, like America's surrounded by two vast oceans. Like, there's not a country in the world that can touch us. So like, there's a whole nother vector to like the reason behind doing a lot of these things. And I mean, I think the thought that Russia, a resurgent, like peak Red Army, like at the end of World War II, is going to sweep across Europe again. It's frankly ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
And the fact that we have like the best intelligence agencies in the world, even before this war kicked off, and they couldn't have publicly said that. They freaking knew that. I mean, so to me, that just means like that this whole thing. I mean, it's more of like sticking it to people that have stuck it to us in the past,
Yep.
and the military-industrial complex. Really, I mean, those are the two big. I mean, that's the gravy train there.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it really is kind of sad that Ukraine is stuck in the middle of all this, and it would have been far better had the peace been achieved in March of last year. Clearly, because I mean, you can't tell me that the city of Kherson and some fields in Kharkov are worth the price that's been paid since then.
Oh, absolutely.
So real quick, because you're a busy guy, I don't want to take up all your time, but we're at about 40 minutes, and you kind of got into Israel Gaza a little bit there, and I want to get your view on that.
Sure.
What is your assessment of the situation going on in Gaza right now?
So I think that my personal opinion is that Hamas acted independently. If you look at Hamas's history, I would consider them almost a proxy of the United States. That they were created by the United States for to control Gaza, right? And that they are the Muslim Brotherhood. That's where they stem from. So I don't see them aligned with Iran at all. I find this whole thing to be very confusing, and I don't think a lot of people actually understand. I believe that Hamas acted alone. I do not think that they gave any warning to Iran what was going to happen. I think that the attack on October 7th was a way. I think, I don't follow this conflict. I haven't followed the history extremely close. I've looked over it. I've studied it. But, my focus has been on Ukraine. I do believe that they were kind of coming up against, they were in a very difficult situation. Hamas as an organization. And Hamas basically said, if we're going to go out, we're going to make it big. And maybe we take out Israel while we're at it, whatever. They go in, they do their thing. And their goal was this reaction exactly. I don't know if they thought that they were going to fare better. Perhaps the Israelis weren't going to go as crazy with the bombings and just completely destroy the city and invade. I don't know what their actual plan was. Perhaps it was get Hezbollah and the Houthis involved to protect the Palestinian people. I don't believe that Hamas cares about the Palestinian people.
Well, yeah, okay. I was going to say the same exact thing.
No. There's no way you go into Israel and kill civilians and military and think this is what's right for the Palestinian people. No, it's absolutely not. I separate Palestinian people from Hamas completely, even though there is support for Hamas in Palestine. Kids are not Hamas, and that they are the ones that are suffering right now in particular. And, I don't know if this is what they had hoped for, but I don't think that Gaza is going to get out of this as a city. I think that the Palestinians will basically be genocided, and I don't mean genocided as in killed. I think that they're all going to be displaced, and I don't believe that Iran will get involved because, first off, Israel is a nuclear-armed power, right? Any threat to the Israeli state is going to be met with a nuclear response. I completely think that they're going to do that. And Iran knows that. And Iran is not going to get involved because of Hamas, especially the way Hamas conducted their operation. It was very brutal. I don't think Iran wants any part of that. I think that what is happening on the northern border with Hezbollah is they are taking advantage of the reduced military presence and the they go back and forth all the time. So they're taking out all the cameras and all the optics and hitting some tanks and doing some damage, getting their licks in, but it's not ever going to escalate beyond that. And I think Iran has actually used this to their advantage in getting sanction reduction and potentially frozen assets returned to them. But I don't really think that there's much of a chance of a wider war. I do think that Israel is going to lose this in the long term. I think they have to come back to their own issues eventually, which is going to be a problem. And now they have completely isolated themselves. They're Jews in a Muslim world, and they're just slaughtering Palestinians right now, which is not a good look. I think that this is going to hurt U.S.-Saudi relations. I think that Israel is going to become very, very isolated in this region. And just basically become a forward operating base for the U.S. military. But outside of that, I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of got lost in it a little bit, but
I wanted you to get lost in it. That's good. It's interesting, like what you say about Hamas, just not being connected. It's so, if what you're saying is spot on truth, and God help us if people just going out with a bang is as a military force that's not at war. If you're like, all right, we're going to start some shit because we're going out of power, that's scary. And it's not. Isn't
that kind of the idea of jihad though?
Yeah, and man, it just brings up like the craziest thing is like and this is you're right. Like there's so much more emotion behind this than there is even the Russia-Ukraine thing. And I was saying this with Alex earlier. It's like, with Russia-Ukraine, like you have, your Russians, Ukrainians, like however many of them are in the West that speak English that are, like amongst the crowd, and they're upset and, like they're waving flags around. Sure, great. You could do that in the West. But like all the other people that joined in on it are just like, those are your suburban white Slava Ukraini crowd, it's so weird. Like you don't even know what you're talking about.
The LGBTQ groups that are out protesting in support of Hamas in Palestine. I'm like, do you guys even know what the cultural?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, that's. Well, we could go deep in that, but I mean, it's not like like if you think what the Russians are doing is wrong and you want to say something about it, then dude, like you have that absolute right, and you have my respect for it as well. Like no one should be chastised for speaking their opinion. And
I'm a free speech absolutist, so I think that everything should be said, every opinion, and the good opinions and good ideas will rise to the surface, and everything else should be discarded through rational and critical thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that entirely. There's like rare cases where like where I think obviously like free speech in America is an absolute. Like you can't say like bomb on an airplane or fire.
Firing
like it's
people.
There's different forums. There's like public forums and like places where you can't say certain words. But I mean, despite all that, like the Israel-Palestine thing it's just so crazy, man, because like people have been entrenched in their positions for a long time, and it's not so one-sided, man. It's not simple at all. Like it's a very complicated issue, and like like one side is certainly kicking the shit out of the other right now, and it's very easy to say like that side's doing bad, but just like a month ago, it was like the complete opposite, like that's how crazy this and how it can change so fast. And people get up and these you make a great point, but like just like the kind of, I guess the woke left has been like the worst about it. I mean, the right openly supports Israel, and like they're, like, I mean, they're solid on that point, and they say exactly why. And if half of these like right wing politicians, it's like, oh, do you support Israel because you hate Islam? They're just going to be like, yeah, like they don't give a shit, like,
or the Bible told me that this is how that Israel is right.
They'll quote Christianity and why they support Israel and stuff, but like the left just has no idea like what they're talking about on these things. And there's so many, I cannot watch these people that get up on interviews and stuff, and they refuse to like say Hamas is like a terrorist group. Well, first of all, it's weird to be like, you need to say this to me. It's like, if you don't want to say something, you shouldn't have to say something. But still, like, they'll like dance around it and say that like Hamas isn't a terrorist group, or like they were. It's weird. It's because like you can't have it both ways. Either Hamas is a terrorist group that acted independently and committed this atrocity.
Yeah,
that's, if you're taking that line, that point, that's actually the pro-Palestinian point. Because the other way, if you're refusing to say that they're a terrorist group, you're somewhat acknowledging that they're the legitimate government, which means Gaza did this to Israel, not Hamas independently. And now
that justifies Israel's actions.
It does.
Obviously not. My thinking.
By the definition that we gave the word justification at the beginning.
If it's Gaza, then the invasion of Gaza makes sense. If it's Hamas, then the bombing and invasion of Gaza does not make sense.
Yeah. But I mean, it's so sad, man. It's an absolute tragedy, and
I can't even look at it. It's horrible.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's horrible. And I mean, just the same thing.
It's like Azerbaijan and Armenia, man. Those conflicts, what I like about the Ukraine conflict, and that sounds really weird to say out loud, I don't like it, but the good part about the Ukraine conflict is that there is not a underlying religious ideology conflict as well as a political conflict. You have a war that's being fought rather tamely. I mean, you have your war crimes here and there, but for the most part, outside of individual bad actors, the Russo-Ukrainian war has been rather tame. You look at Azerbaijan and Armenia, you look at any of these religiously tense wars, they are just horrible, man. They are just the worst things to look at.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly astonishing what man is capable of doing to one another. It really is. And I mean, you're kind of right. I mean, the Russia-Ukraine war is, it's mechanized, fully mechanized conflict, and we know what that looks like.
Yeah.
Or if we didn't, we do now. So, like, I mean, there's not a lot that's unexpected there, and for the most part, like most of what you see, is captured from drone footage is pretty far away. So, unless you're taking the deep dark dives into Telegram, you're not seeing some of the more awful stuff, which certainly is there.
Yeah.
All right, Scott. We're about 50 minutes. I'm getting better at this. I'm trying to make these about 45 minutes. So
that's the usual attention span. I mean, I don't know if I want to watch something more over an hour.
Some people just like to put stuff on in the background, but it is kind of difficult. So, all right, where can people find you at?
All right, so if you guys want to follow me for my constant updates, my more humorous stuff, that's going to be on Twitter. I do both analysis and I do a little bit of trolling, I guess you would call it. I make fun of people, but I try to keep it at least semi-professional. My Telegram, you will find a lot more of my analysis work and updates on more of my personal stuff, my channel and stuff like that. I don't do as much of that on Twitter. So on Twitter, you can find me. You just type in Aiden and you'll find me, or at Swatson. And then on Telegram, it's just Kalibrated. And then that's my Telegram. And most importantly, my YouTube page, which is Kalibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. And I would really appreciate if you would come on my show sometime in the future.
Absolutely. I've been on before, back when you were on Spotify, I think is what you were doing it, right?
Oh, that was when I was with the DD group.
Okay.
Yeah, and now I'm on my own. So it is my own standalone podcast. But it was Calibrated. You are right. You have come on. But I would love to have you on the new podcast.
Absolutely, man. Hey, I'm pretty much always available. Doing a little bit of traveling here soon, but just you know how to get a hold of me.
Yeah. All right.
All right, man. Thanks for coming on. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Yep. Take care.